Hello everybody. I am deeply honored to bring you this video. I think we are about to reveal Jesus in history, the historical Jesus, or at least the main one, the main personality and the identity around which other ideas and adventures belonging to other prophets were clustered over time, like a snowball rolling down a hill. Over time, the avalanche of personalities being forgotten and cut down, manifesting in what we today know as the Gospels, which purport to talk about Christ. This is a patron video. If you're a patron on Patreon, I tend to listen to your video requests. This video is also the result of many years of research. I do hope you will find it illuminating. In this video, I am going to reveal the person I believe to be the historical Jesus, the identity, the man. And we are going to look at one of the main contenders, Sohamus, king of the tiny kingdom of Commagene, which was a remnant of the Seleucid Greek Empire, and a tiny buffer state between Rome and Parthia. It was the final descendants of Seleucus, general of Alexander, who carved the strange heads on the mountaintop, familiar on so many postcards and ancient mystery videos. Now, there have been many books written about the historical Jesus. I have found that most are worth less than the paper they are printed on. The reason is they tend to draw on the New Testament as a historical source rather than localizing it to a time after Jesus. They quote it direct as if it were a reference to first century Palestine events. To be honest, that's like quoting Churchill about what was going on in Moscow in 1945, when what we really want to be quoting is the diary of, say, a Russian general who was present in a particular meeting. Although the New Testament contains some letters from supposedly the time after Christ between actual Christians so that we can get a handle on what was supposed to have been believed or reckoned that Christianity entailed in that time, the Gospels themselves are really fictional accounts. Let's look into actual history and have a look to see what was going on. So today we're going to talk about this murky early history of Christianity. Chuck of Ancient Mystery fame of his channel CF Apps has made a couple of videos about the king of a buffer state known as Sohamus, of this buffer state, Commagene, or however it was pronounced, and has drawn significant attention to this king. And he's shown in his videos how Sohamus actually looks like Jesus of the Shroud, of the fame of the Shroud, doing a photo comparison. Now, I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to do other videos on the Shroud, which is a very weird piece of matter, quote unquote, to say the least. It is really weird. This video is about the different historical Christs and how they all hopefully fit together in relation to the Sun religion. For the formation of the early form of Christianity of, say, the first 300 years, which is based on the Sun religion. So please enjoy. Now, Sohamus' full name was Gaius Julius Sohamus Philocaesar Philohemus. It's a bunch of gobbledygook, and it's a name the Romans seem to have given him, possibly even after his death. It's in that kind of style. Sohamus was the ruler of the sun cult, a priest king, and his sun cult actually conquered the Roman Empire before so-called Christianity did. Or was the sun cult actual Christianity in its early stages? Now, where did this guy live? He lived in what is now known as Syria. Syria and its current borders is based on the Roman state of Syria. It was resurrected by all these Brits after World War I who had themselves had a classical education. They called it Syria, which was the Roman name after the Wars of Hadrian, Syria Palestina. The name goes back to the Assyrians. It is basically the home of the Phoenicians. And that is where this religion comes from. It is the sun cult, but it is also the cult of the stone circle. Now, I put it to you that if only the Library of Alexandria had not been destroyed, we would clearly see Jesus in the historical record. Flavius Josephus, and we're going to talk about him a lot, was a Jewish governor and a general captured by the Romans, yet spared, as he was able to sufficiently flatter the general Vespasian, who went on to become emperor. He went to live in Rome and wrote stories of his time. In this way, Josephus' life is a bit like Ben-Hur's. Josephus lived about a generation after Christ is said to have been born, according to estimates done in the European Dark Ages, but I'm going to throw some light on that as well. Yet he never mentions Christ as we know him today. That Christ does not really seem to exist in the first century. Christianity has changed. You see, this is not just weird. It is not just weird that he does not mention Christ, but it's really weird, as Josephus seems to have covered about everything else in Jewish politics of the time. It's not a question of him deliberately not recording Christ, as a Jew who might have disagreed with Christ's teachings, as he actually recorded plenty of things he didn't like, among them other heretical prophets who sound a lot like Jesus, but there were lots of them. This gives us questions which need answers. Either Jesus went by another name, or he was edited out during the remainder of the pagan times and then edited back into all historical texts in the Middle Ages. You see, in Josephus, he was edited into Josephus' work by monks in passages which actually sound like they were written in the Middle Ages and not ancient times. Of course, there are additions to the text of Josephus made in the Middle Ages. Insertions were a little too obvious, little addendums here and there about Christ, which don't really fit into the body of the text. They are there in certain manuscripts. Clearly, these additions were inserted by frustrated monks who read Josephus from cover to cover and were unable to find anything which correlated with the New Testament. So, what's going on? Could it be that our ideas of Jesus and the New Testament itself have changed dramatically over the millennia? That would seem to be the case. Clearly, it was established and fixed at one time before, but that tradition was unbelievably fluid, more so than most today would recognize. You see, there were actually lots of Jesuses in religious positions, and these were called Jesus. They lived in Judea. Lots of them are associated with the temple itself, which of course Jesus is associated with in the New Testament, and that really confuses things. So here's the thing. If you want greater detail regarding what's happening in the New Testament from a source who was actually there really isn't much choice but to read Josephus. I've mentioned that after reading Josephus, if you then go back to reading the New Testament, well, what happened to me was that I came away with the impression that the New Testament authors had never even visited the Holy Land. They were not natives of the Holy Land. They never lived there. And that becomes very clear to you after reading Josephus, because Josephus is full of names, geographical locations, events at particular dates. You read the New Testament, it sounds like a fairy tale. And that was very clear to me. It's written in a fairy tale kind of tone and structure. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were very common names and still are in the West. Probably because they are Roman, not Hebrew or Syrian. That is Aramaic or Phoenician, which is the Syrian language. That means it was all written by the Romans for the Greek half of the empire, as that is the lingo of the Gospels. What are the four Gospels? Well, it's basically four different editions of the same book. The Romans, for all of their technology, do not seem to our knowledge to have possessed the printing press, but who knows? Maybe they did have one, and history does not record this. Students and others looking for an income would have spent all their spare time, therefore, rewriting the New Testament over and over again, as they did in the Middle Ages. And of course, they would have been open to suggestions. Oh, I want a copy where Jesus does this. I want a copy where, say, Jesus, as only in the book of John, spares the harlot from being stoned. That's a nice story. You see, this is how it changed over time. I think that each of the four Gospels is an edition which was once actually known as the life of Jesus. If you try reading the lives of other philosophers, pagan philosophers and prophets, among which survives Apollonius, and this is suggested online. There's a huge conspiracy. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria was designed to get rid of all these pagan books, which sound like Gospels, but they're about different people. Insert Jesus here on the dotted line, basically. And he's suggested to be another Christ-like figure. Then if you try reading that, you will see remarkable similarities to the Gospel writing style. In fact, the Gospel seems to be, I would say it's condensed. It seems to neglect what Jesus was up to in his formative years. They deliberately excised that because it was too confusing, or it was not practical, or for whatever reason. The Gospel writing style, you will find, is not unique to the Gospels, but was used for many mythical figures. However, due to their brief size, the Gospels are specially designed for dissemination throughout the Roman Empire. Written editions sold to middle and upper classes. Someone, somewhere, collected various editions, and there would have been way more than 4, I bet you, but only 4 survive in the current text. Each gospel was once sold in shops as a purported gospel. People who wanted to know more went for these. They then discarded what they didn't like or what no longer fit into the political agenda of the day and kept the rest. Now, if you look at the other Gospels, the Apocryphal Gospels, you're going to find a lot of information. There are more stories about Jesus in Egypt, other stories. These are all stories which were sold in Roman times about Christ, but they're not in the Bible. Not because they didn't happen, but because people decided they don't belong in the Bible. You will also see strange Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas. These are non-political philosophical sayings, probably because the political component would have been too dangerous to reproduce and sell in a manuscript form to somebody who was interested in Christ. These complications all make the search for the historical Jesus unbelievably complicated, believe me. But we're going to suggest in a video coming up that we're going to reveal who I think Jesus was and who other contenders are. This has been part 1. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. Stay tuned for part 2. Bye-bye.